Hey there, thanks for listening in, and welcome to another Ellipsis Drive Podcast. Here we dive into the stories of people, companies, and technologies that transform and empower spatial data-driven industries. My name is Rosalie van der Maas, and today we have JC Clark with us. JC is a fountain of knowledge when it comes to insurance, Earth observation, and entrepreneurship. And in his career, he's been with Maxar as head of commercial products, with Arturo as CEO, and he's currently putting his expertise to work as a strategic advisor to a great set of startups, as well as head of product at Array Labs. JC, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Rose.
Sure thing.
Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. So today, I would like to spend the next 20, 30 minutes or so discussing Array Labs' go-to-market journey. I've had the privilege to learn a bit more about it, and I find it a story that's definitely worth sharing. So, JC, can I ask you, when you joined Array Labs, where was the company at, and where is it currently on the journey to greatness in the new space industry?
Yeah, great question. So, I actually first met the founding team at Array Labs, when they were, I think, the proverbial, two people in a garage, back in, I believe it was early 2021 timeframe. I was maybe even a little bit before that, to be honest, where they had just kind of accepted the idea. They hadn't raised any capital. I think they had one check from Brian McClendon, former CTO at Keyhole, Google Earth, Google, now Niantic, and that was about it. And they came and said they were interested in getting advice on how to create this real-time 3D map of the world. Having in my career spent time early with the Keyhole and Google Earth and Maps team, a lot of passion for 3D and where remote sensing could bring 3D of our planet. So I agreed to serve as an advisor for them. So served as an advisor for some time, and then late last year moved into a full-time role with the business to really begin to craft and shape the product and go-to-market strategy. But since it's a startup, there's no just crafting strategy. There's also the execution of it, right? So how do we also begin that execution? So where we have come from a coffee shop meeting 3-4 years ago to where we are today is very, very different. I'm pleased to say that coming into a startup, it's really about putting a product in market and being able to have customers interact with that product, learn how customers want to interact with that product, how they don't want to interact with that product. And I'm excited that we've had a lot of really incredible learning and also substantial customer demand and interest over my, now almost a year here.
Yeah, so when you told me about how you went about getting that customer interest lined up, I thought that was a great strategy to go at it, especially when you're in the new space industry, you are planning to operate satellites and the timelines are always long. So could you highlight a bit about the strategy that you deployed to make sure that you have that interest and that demand lined up before you have much of a product to put in the market yet? I think that's a great angle.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for emphasizing that. I think too often over the 20, now I'm perhaps embarrassed to admit, 20 something years I've had in the remote sensing location industry, especially in remote sensing, it seems like for quite a while, there was always this notion that if we build it, they'll come, right? If we give daily surface of the planet imagery, they'll come. There'll be a million use cases unlocked. If we have hyperspectral or multispectral, the planet, they'll come. And while I certainly believe in order to educate a market about what they could do, there's a certain amount of leaning into what a future state looks like. The miss I often see is the validation with a customer who is willing to buy into that future end state prior to the end state arriving. So a lot of times it's like, people are excited, let's build. And then once it's built, we go figure out how we use. And I think the key thing at Array for me was, how do we demonstrate that end state to customers well in advance of us actually achieving it? And in the remote sensing world, that's a very chicken and egg problem, right? To your point, satellites take a while to design, to launch, to calibrate, operate, and that amount of time, generally, I see few companies spend developing real intimacy around their data and their use case, et cetera. So one of the things that I did when I first got to Array was I was actually looking at how we create synthetic data that's representative of what radar-derived 3D data from space would look like. And one of the first ways we thought to do that, and one of the first ways that you and I spoke about using, in fact, from the Ellipsis Drive platform, was taking LiDAR data, 3D point cloud LiDAR data, and then subsampling it to the target kind of resolution or voxel size that our radar constellation will produce when it's on orbit. And that was a first approach. And so we began kind of learning how customers thought about it. And one of the things I noticed is either customers knew what LiDAR was and were immediately beginning to ask questions like, how's your data going to compare to this? Because I use LiDAR now. I know it really, really well. Or worse, they didn't know what LiDAR was. And so I had to then educate them about what LiDAR was and then talk about how our thing was going to be point clouds or similar, but not LiDAR. So they're like, okay, so you're not like the thing that I didn't know about, but now I knew about, but it's not that. And so I was like, okay, gosh, this is a bit confusing. And so the next question I had was there a way, perhaps not at the same scale, perhaps not the same quality, perhaps not at the same cost basis that our own constellation would deliver, but is there a way to create 3D data, radar-derived 3D data from space today? And fortunately, we found an answer there that could be yes. And that answer really came from a fantastic partnership. So while there are several probably well-known synthetic aperture SAR radar imagery providers out there today, ICEYE, Capella, and Umbra are probably the most three commonly known. The relationship with Umbra really was important for us because I think they've had one of the absolutely differentiated views at trying to make their data useful and also not telling the world do this with our data, but saying here is so easy to get to our data, it's so easy to fast it, it's so easy to consume it, go learn. And my credit, give all the credit in the world to the team over there, especially Gabe, but also Joe Morrison specifically, who's often on X out there saying many controversial things, but they truly practice what they preach. And so that gave us a path to get data that's radar data from space over sites that we wanted to, say, create 3D for. And again, in a very different modality, in a very different methodology that our own constellation will do, but it's radar data, check. The next question became like, how do we turn that into 3D, right? Because I don't know if you've ever seen radar drive 3D before some of the stuff I've shown you, but
I have not.
I never have in my career. I've been almost 20 years in this space. So that's where I give a lot of credit to actually Raytheon Technologies and their defense missile and space and intelligence, rather, their space and intelligence business, because they had done some really, really innovative work for largely defense customers around intelligence use cases with how can we create 3D from lots of different types of data. And one of the things that they had invested some research and development around is like, could you do it with radar data the same way some companies do it with raster data? And the answer was yes, it's possible with that team. So working in conjunction with our partners at Umbra on the data side and our partners at Raytheon on some of the 3D SAR image reconstruction side, we were actually able to, instead of building synthetic products that were representative of what our system should do at some point in the future, actually put in customers' hands real data that has been derived from radar, from satellite space right now, that at least follows the technical methodology of space, radar, 3D, and now I can put it to your hand. And that's been transformative because it's enabled us to do two things. One, educate customers about a radar-based 3D product that's actually radar-based, check. Two, educate customers about what the differences are from other types of 3D that they've seen, either be it from aerial or from satellite, or even like generative AI, like Black Shark AI, who can create 3D scenes from 2D imagery. And the other thing it's actually done is let us get to revenue. So the great thing about having a product that is real is that you can sell it to people. It's very hard to sell synthetic data. Hey, this is what our data might look like. Will you buy it, please? Gosh, that's a hard sell. Here, our car may look like this. Please buy it now. Whereas this is what the product is today. The good news is it's only going to get higher resolution, more frequently updated, far larger coverage areas, and way cheaper. But if you start here and can find value in this product, the good news is there'll only be more of it, everywhere, and it's cheaper. And that's been really, really exciting and effective.
And I think that's such a great proof point as well. Like if you can get people to buy into something that like isn't as good as where it should be 2-3 years from now, then that does paint a bright future for the technology that you're working on. So yeah, thanks for explaining that. I thought it was very interesting to learn about when I heard about it first. But so you mentioned the ambition is large. It's a 3D map of the world, or at least like 3D data at a large scale, and get that into people's hands. What does that mean for the infrastructure that you need to be relying on? Because it's a new data type, like you mentioned, and indeed I can concur. I have not seen radar derived 3D data before in my life. So what does it mean to be a trailblazer like that from an infrastructure perspective? Like where does that data go? How do you get it into people's hands? What are the challenges there?
Well, that's the $1 million question. So first of all, the 3D data, point data is inherently more dense dimensionally, right? 2D raster, you've got an X and Y, and you generally get a color value, pixel value, RGB at its simplest form. You obviously get lots of exciting metadata, I'm sure, and other multi-bands and things like that. But as soon as you go to 3D, you certainly by a dimension increase the density of your data. And that's before you add any additional metadata parameters or radar, intensity data or data that came from the original sensor as it collected the underlying complex phase history data from radar. So the bottom line is it's big. It's much bigger than 2D. And so I think when we think about building the first real-time 3D map of the world, and I've already talked publicly in market about creating, at least for the US, Australia, and Japan, a border-to-border, coast-to-coast, full coverage data set updated every 90 days for the entire landmass of those countries. That is not an insignificant amount of data alone. It's approaching petabytes just for those, and per data set. So when we think about the infrastructure that we're going to need, we think about, I think, two things. One, you have to just get the data to ground, and you've got to process it. You've got to create this product. The next thing, though, I think it's really important, and hopefully one of the things we can talk about a little bit later in our time together is, but what is a customer going to actually do with the data? So for instance, we have a customer who's interested in measuring the amount of materials in certain locations of the world. And I'll be a little respectful for their exact use case, but there's certain materials in certain places, and they want to know how much of them there is on a weekly or monthly basis. They also don't have any good way to do this today. It's very difficult to do this with satellite imagery. There's no aerial imagery that's frequent. Setting people up to drones to 50 diverse locations around the world every week is, very, very time consuming, expensive. There might be bad weather. So when we think about what radar can do, see through clouds, day, night, kind of smoke, fire, haze, go and image and still produce an effective data product. A lot of times people think, oh, great, I've produced this really cool 3D. Yeah, it's a big file. Here you go, customer. And one of the things that I might be able to show later, it's about a 5 gigabyte file to show just one look at, a couple days of activity. And that is massively more than what the image would be if it was just like a Maxar, new Legion image, right? From the new 30 centimeter constellation. So then the next thing for us to think about is once we've got the data down, once we've got it to ground, once we've formed this raw information, is what does the customer actually want out of it? And oftentimes that's going to be a wholly different product that you derive from the 3D, but isn't the 3D itself. Like in this customer's case, right? I said they want to know the amount of materials in specific places and how much those are increasing or decreasing. And so we can actually begin to think about how machine learning and how analytics can now operate on the data, the large data, in order to, I like to think of it as distilling down that subset of information out of all the universe of potential information you can derive from the 3D to just the type of information the customer needs. And then I think the next piece is then how do you present that to the customer, and what type of additional visualization might the customer need to validate or feel comfortable about that highly distilled answer? Because if you could think about it, you could have location A, X, cubic meters of material, location B, and that could be a tabular data, CSV. But a customer, oftentimes when you introduce new technology like this, they want to understand that it's truly working. And so how do you give them a lightweight, easy to use way to interact with it as well on top of it? And so I really think that's where our journey has been over this year at Array, is how do we design infra that's going to be able to handle a lot of data, but then how do we really ask ourselves and our customers, how do you want to interact with it? And what are the questions you need answered? And then how can I push you just the answer you need versus, gigabytes, petabytes, terabytes, and whatever of content?
That makes sense. So as part of that challenge, there is, as you mentioned, a visualization challenge. And a visualization challenge is mostly around, at least at this stage, making people comfortable with the data you provide them and making them trust the results. So what does that mean for what you're building in-house? Because it sounds like that's something that you need now, but you may not need 2 years from now or 3 years from now. Is that correct?
I think that the reality is that our product here at Array, will hopefully consistently improve over time. And I also found in my time previously, when I was head of commercial product at Maxar, or even my time when I was supporting Google Earth and Maps team at a startup my brother and I co-founded called T Sciences, anytime you can solve a customer's problem successfully, they tend to then ask for another problem for you to solve. And well, what if could we also do this? And so I think what'll be really important long-term for Array, and what I found that being long-term important for almost any business that's doing location or remote sensing, or, I'll even say GIS, that being able to take large amounts of data, make that easily accessible and interactable and computable now in our kind of machine learning age, and then demonstrable are all necessary tenets or pillars in core good product development. As an example, at Arturo, where I had the privilege to serve as CEO for a little over 4 years, 97% of what our customers purchased was actually a CSV output about a property. It was, the roof is this many square feet, it's this material, there's 20% staining inside this little, percentage, and here's a little GeoJSON of that vector area. Inside, again, though, it's CSV, and 97% of customers only accessed that information. We gave them links that by API, they could go get to the vector layers and go get to the raster layer and go get to this and go get to that. And only 3% of them touched it. But what we had to build is an infrastructure to store this data and compute on this data, and then visualize the data when customers were wanting to validate that it was actually generating information that they could trust. And so even though in the business of Arturo, creating information about property using machine learning on raster data was really the goal or the product, there were necessary things at the time we had to build. We couldn't buy them, that were about, interacting and processing on that data, potentially showing that data and allowing others to then visualize and interact with that data. It's super exciting to me that what was the case at Arturo and for a long time is now not the case for many businesses, including modern businesses and other industries who are beginning to become adopters of this type of information in their environment, who've never thought about what this info might look like for them, or how they should think about it from a data security and, CI or IT perspective, or sharing who should see what. which is a whole nother set of challenges with location data you don't get with like a Word doc. It's like either you can see it or you don't. You got the show point rights or not. Very different in our world.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does the current infrastructure sort of differ between like an Arturo and what you have now figured out is good for Array Labs? And I know that Ellipsis Drive plays a role in this as well. But I think it's interesting to touch on where you can now make a buy decision versus the build decision you had to make 5 years ago, give or take.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So, coming to our, recording today, I don't think we have all the answers yet at Array on what, our full ground segment's going to look like, how internationally distributed is it, which cloud providers are going to be, the best for us to move that raw data from, space to the ground segment into now do something with it. I don't think we have the perfect answer on like, what is that going to look like yet? And I think, fortunately, we have some time to figure that out and scale that. I think the exciting thing is what we've been able to do in literally days with and via our relationship with Ellipsis Drive is simulate what that's going to look like with our Site 3D product, where I got, Umbra star data that I'm pulling in. I've got, very, very dense point cloud data that I'm putting in Ellipsis Drive. I've got customer polygons that say like, here's all the, points I care about. And then here's all the little defined areas near those points that, this is an area of this type of thing. I want to be again careful with our customer use cases here in the description, but it's 2D vector data, right? And typically, we would have, in order to just do what we're doing with Site 3D to both make the point data available to customers, to allow them to visualize it in a web browser simply and easily, no download required, right? They don't even have, there's like most people don't have a map and a web page. And then bring some of their data, like the locations they care about and our data together, has literally taken us days. And I'm sad to say, but we're a startup, do it all. I've done it myself, and I've had a product that haven't written code in years, and I haven't needed to with Ellipsis Drive in order to kind of take that whole process and emulate what it's going to look like with a lot smaller data, but in days, drag and drop, and all through a web-based interface. Now, there's some fantastic aspects of the APIs that we expect, and we already have some customers who are already excited to leverage. Oh, great, I can connect to this data set where you have on Ellipsis Drive, put Site 3D, and pull it right into my GS tools. Oh, this is fantastic, right? Or, I can download it if I want to pull it into a desktop viewer. Fantastic. So I think the key learning for Array was that we could rapidly put products in customers' hands and eliminate a need for substantial cloud hosting set up on our own, technical and product engineering and infra people to begin to set up in order to get this kind of very early representative product, Site 3D, to customers in a way that they need to feel comfortable interacting with it, and ultimately a way to serve their full use case with nothing more than a credit card to sign up and get going. This is something that I would easily have spent $100,000 to $150,000 annually on between AWS and software engineering or product engineering resources back in Arturo, if not at least $250K. To 2 days. That's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. So it is good to hear that with the time that you've spent, like that 20 some years within the EO industry and the new space industry, I've seen like leaps and bounds in the advancements of technologies, both for the organization you work for as well as the organizations you work with. So that's exciting news, I would say. That's good to hear. So I think we touched on a number of things already, like regarding the fact that you have to manage the data that Array Labs is producing in very specific ways that requires new solutions. You've thought long and hard about what it actually is that the client needs in their hands, but also understanding what sort of infrastructure needs to underpin that. Do you have any closing thoughts for us on any goals for 2024 or perhaps further down the line that you'd like to share or highlight?
I think more of an observation on where the market is headed, that I'm trying to strategize to some degree. At Array, we've got a product in market now. Our Site 3D product is derived from our partner Umbra's data using some IP with Raytheon, along with some of our kind of go-to-market expertise and our own ability to kind of pull that together and deliver it to a customer in a meaningful way. But we're still, 1 to 2 years off from having, our satellites in orbit, producing data, and then several years off from multiple constellations getting, full service of the planet daily, the dream. And a lot of times I think that, as Remote Sensei, I mentioned this at the beginning of our chat today, as this buildup will come mentality, and I've worked really, really hard to think, how are we constantly learning with the market, with the customers at every step along the way, up until the day that the vision is achieved. Sometimes I think the vision outruns the execution, and that's dangerous. Actually, as I think from a product perspective, the vision should get closer to the execution, as you move over a continuum of time. But I also have to think about, what does the world look like in 3 years from a technological perspective? And one of the things, if I go back to Maxar, when I first joined that business in 2015, I had this very, very early passion about convolutional neural nets and cloud computing. And what if you could put petabytes of Maxar, at the time Digital Globe content, in the cloud? And then what if you could use these cool things called convolutional neural nets? And again, this is 2015. And I think a lot of people at the time thought I was crazy, or, it was what's this, machine learning, CNNs? What are CNNs? I thought that's a news network in the US. And now we look at the world we're in today, right, where we think about machine learning and AI, generative LLMs, LAMs, LBMs, and we have so much more now in really under 10 years. And it's ubiquitous to think about data being in a cloud hosted environment. I think about kind of, what does the world need to look like for what Array's designing products for? And to me, I think one of the key to those is the computability of data. Someone said to me, a dear friend who I worked with at Google back in the day, who's now at NVIDIA, had a company, Mark Wheeler had a company called DeepMap. He sold to NVIDIA, that we sometimes anthropomorphize spatial data. We think about spatial data the way humans think about maps, not the way machines think about interpreting data. And I think that's one of my big goals, is how do I use great platforms that abstract, the ability to put the data into a computable environment, where I cannot make investments there because I'm leveraging investments others have made and using their services. And exactly what we're doing at the Ellipsis Drive right now, Site 3D, but how is it computable first? So visualization is super important for showing a customer, yeah, we have big data, but I think computability is really the future, because I do think in 2 or 3 years' time, if we continue to extrapolate out the advances in machine learning, we're going to have capabilities that dwarf and blow our minds about what we have today. And we think right now it's kind of cool. It's going to be mind-blowing, but it won't be if our data is not computable. And so I love thinking about, how do we get the data in an in-front-end environment, and how do we not invest heavily in having to create that ourselves? That's going to give us that advantage. And, that's one of the key aspects of the relationship with Ellipsis Drive that's super meaningful to me, because there's always been an emphasis first on getting data, and be it on-prem, off-prem, white label, whatever, into cloud infra that makes it computable first, and then easy APIs to stream it, download it, chunk it, kind of do what you need to, inherent to the platform. Plus, now you can throw it into visualization quickly if you need to get someone to understand those outputs. So that's my preview of the future, is make data more computable.
All right, we'll take close note of that, and we'll have to transcribe it somehow to pin that one down and check on that in 3 years. I was gonna say 3 weeks, but that would be a little short notice. But that's great. Yeah, that really brings us full circle. And with that, we're also at time. So on behalf of our listeners, thank you so much for sharing all your insights. It's really very much appreciated. And if you're tuning in and like to know more, we'll leave some links in the description so you can find the resources you're looking for. So yeah, at that, thanks for being here with us today, and until the next one.
Thanks so much. Cheers.